I thought it was a terrific selection and a very worthwhile book and just rich for discussion and just thrilled that this wonderful author could come to Bend.
I loved the book. I thought it was really interesting. I liked the following, the genealogy part of it.
I think everybody needs to understand what happened with the slave trade. It wasn't nearly as simple as everybody expects, and she does a wonderful job of explaining exactly what it was like.
I enjoyed it very much. She is such a descriptive writer.
I think it's really important for us to read this kind of history, which is really what it is. It's a novel, but it's really history, and get a better understanding of the roots of people of color from Africa in this country.
I loved how it captured the characters and showed that everybody has good qualities and some bad qualities as well.
It was very, very informational, and I wasn't really aware of the beginnings of the slave transport across the Atlantic. We know our own history, but didn't know where it all started, so I've learned that.
Novel Idea is the best community read in the entire country. We are so fortunate to have this wonderful library system and this phenomenally successful program.
Called Obo Legacy Project. That's where we're from, and our group name is called Groupon. You know, I know Obo been to Bend many years, and a few years ago he passed away. That's my father. Yeah, so we continue legacy, and so that's my cousin. Him and I, the leader of the group. This is all we are in the family. This is our senior cousin. And she's only female and our lead dancer in the group. Okay, and we have the second lead. So we thank you for being here to be a part of this big honor thing. We appreciate it. Thank you guys also for having us here. And we're gonna move on and play you a music called Wamimba. Hagbahe Manyola Hagbahe Manyola Hagbahe Manyola Hagbahe Manyola Oh yoino Oh stroino Hagbahe Manyola Hagbahe Manyola Hagbahe Manyola Hagbahe Manyola Hagbahe Manyola Oh yoino Oh stroino Hagbahe Manyola Wamimba 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 Wakawahile Wamimba Wakawayele Wamimba Okropo Webie Wamimba Esefe Wamimba Wamimba Wakawahile Wamimba Wakawayele Wamimba Okropo Webie Wamimba Esefe Wamimba Wamimba Wakawahile Wamimba Wakawayele Wamimba Obade Webi Wamimba Esefe Wamimba Wakawahile Wamimba Wakawayele Wamimba Okropo Webi Wamimba Esefe Wamimba Wakawahile Wamimba Wakawayele Wamimba Okropo Webi Wamimba Esefe Wamimba member ye. Awo ni member na member ye. Atani member na member ye. Awo 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 ni member na member ye. Awo ni member na member ye. Atani member na member ye. Awo 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 owo tele no wo twashi.
So good afternoon, I'm Todd Dunkelberg, Director of the Deschutes Public Library, and I welcome you to the 14th annual A Novel Idea Read Together. Tonight we celebrate this year's novel Homegoing with the book's author Yaa Gyasi in conversation with local poet and performer Jason Graham. For the last several weeks, the library has organized 30 free cultural programs, films, and discussions across Deschutes County regarding the transatlantic slave trade, blacks in early Oregon, appropriation versus appreciation, and Oregon's only slavery trial. We listened to local author Tom DeWolf discuss his book Inheriting the Trade and created pendants inspired by jewelry in Ghana. And we came together as a community to learn, listen, and understand. This is what A Novel Idea is all about. Every year we deepen community through reading and discussing a single book together. Thank you for your active participation in making A Novel Idea the largest and finest community reading program in Oregon with more than 6,000 participants. Yes. The cultural programs, including tonight's author presentation, are free and open to all people in Deschutes County. The Deschutes Public Library Foundation makes this possible by raising every dollar for these programs. Today, we hope you'll consider helping us make a $10 donation and help us raise $10,000 in 10 weeks for next year's A Novel Idea program. And we have several generous and loyal sponsors who have been supporting A Novel Idea for the past 14 years. Without their support, A Novel Idea could not exist. These special sponsors are the Echo Fund, the Roundhouse Foundation, Ben Research Capsugel, the E.H. and M.E. Bowerman Advised Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation, and the 5 Friends of the Library organization. So thank you, sponsors. This year, the library received generous grants from the Oregon Cultural Trust, the Oregon Arts Commission, and the Pacific Power Foundation. So thank you, grantors. The library's in-kind sponsors are the Ben Bulletin and William Smith Properties. Thank you, in-kind sponsors. And to all of you for your participation and donations. We have a very long list of generous donors on the back of tonight's program. It is tremendous to see the outpouring of support for the library, so thank you all. There you go, clap for yourself. There are many, many more people to thank for each year for who enrich the programs and events. It takes a village to create a month's worth of engaging programs, and we're very grateful to have support and partnership from the Central Oregon Community College, the Multicultural Activities Center at COCC and OSU Cascades. We'd also like to recognize Dr. Carmen Thompson, Karen Roth, Dr. Anna Marie Hamlin, and Gwen Carr, who provided great counsel to our programming team. Other generous partners include Sun River Books and Music, Barnes & Noble, Herringbone Books, Roundabout Books, the University of Oregon, Portland State University, and the many local artists who created paintings and quilts and photography and beautiful pendants inspired by Homegoing. And thanks to our amazing volunteers who give generously to help us set up and take down the event. So thank you all. We are fortunate to have the Deschutes Public Library Foundation Board who dedicates time, money, and energy to make events like tonight's come to life. We could not do it without them. Board members are listed in your program. Thank you, Foundation Board, for all that you do. And to the Novel Idea selection team that chooses the book every year. We're sad to see one of our longest standing members of the committee retire, Miss Ruth Burley. Ruth has served on the committee. Yes, Ruth. She's served on the committee from its inception, and we very much appreciate Ruth's dedication for reading hundreds of books over these 14 years and helping us find the right ones for our community. You will be missed, Ruth. So thank you. And one other special thank you is to the library staff who pull this event together every year. Liz Goodrich, Tina Davis, Ann Hettinger, Susie Olson, and Chantal Strobel. Of special note, Liz Goodrich creates and manages the amazing programs associated with the novel idea, and we believe she did an extraordinary job this year, so thank you, staff. Ms. Gyasi will answer questions following her discussion with Jason Graham. Microphones will be in the aisles. After the question and answer session, Ms. Gyasi will sign books out in the lobby. We are pleased to welcome Roundabout Books as our newest partner. Roundabout Books will be selling books out in the lobby. Please remember to turn off your... And now to the main event. I have the pleasure to introduce Erin Borla this evening, who will then introduce tonight's author and interviewer. Erin Borla was born and raised in Central Oregon. Borla has owned and directed a small public relations firm, Fast Creek Productions, for 14 years and has also served time as the executive director of the Sisters Area Chamber of Commerce. Erin enjoys writing for the Nugget newspaper and Sisters and serves as the trustee for her family's foundation, the Roundhouse Foundation. In her free time, she plays with her husband Chris and their 3 children and enjoys riding horses, knitting, and of course, reading. It is a pleasure to introduce Erin Borla and to personally thank her and her family's foundation for supporting a novel idea for 14 years. Erin Borla.
Thank you so much, Todd, and let's just let that sink in. 6,000 people in Central Oregon participated in this community read. That is amazing. Give yourselves a round of applause. Oh my goodness. What an honor it is to be here this evening to represent our family foundation, the Roundhouse Foundation, and introducing this year's A Novel Idea author. The Roundhouse Foundation is based in Sisters, and we're proud to support activities throughout Central Oregon that showcase and help support the arts. Programs that help further develop the arts as an important part of our regional economy, and most importantly, build community. Activities and events like A Novel Idea bring people together, regardless of gender, class, age, or politics. When individuals have activities and events like these, they're given the opportunity to share a bit of themselves, open a dialogue, participate in deep and thoughtful discussions, and ultimately become part of a community. In a time when divisiveness seems to permeate our culture, events like A Novel Idea can bring us together. And together, that's when great things happen. I'd first like to welcome to the stage Jason Graham, better known as Mosley Wada or Mowo. Jason has been involved with the Deschutes Public Library for years, leading programs and conversations. He's a talented and award-winning spoken word artist, painter, poet, musician, hip-hop artist, father of 3, husband of 1, and friend to all. He will lead the discussion with Yaa Gyasi this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jason Graham.
Thank you. Hello.
Yaa Gyasi began writing as a young girl and submitted her first story to the Reading Rainbow Young Writers and Illustrators Contest. Writing came naturally to her, but it wasn't until she read Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon at age 17 that she realized she could make a career of it. And a solid career began. Ms. Gyasi earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Stanford and a Master's of Fine Arts Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the famed Iowa Writers Workshop. Her debut novel, Homegoing, has won numerous awards and critical acclaim. Most recently, Ms. Gyasi won the Hemingway Award for the best first book. It's an honor to invite Ms. Yaa Gyasi to the stage.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay. Akwaba?
Yeah.
Akwaba. So have you read the book a lot? Have you read this book?
And Akwaba means?
Welcome.
Welcome. Can we say Akwaba to Ya? Yeah, said. Okay, cool. Do you use a chamois or do you just go like this with your glasses?
I usually just do my shirt,
Yeah, I'm
which
saying.
you're not supposed to do.
Yeah. Couple soft pitches to start with. I'm tickled all kinds of colors that you are here. Thank you so much just thank you so much. My goodness, okay. So a lot of questions as always, and I'm glad that we'll be able to get to some of yours tonight, or this afternoon, this evening as well. And we'll see what we get to with all of this. So much, so timely that we have you here. So your father would bring you to a lot of libraries as a kiddo?
Yes.
Okay. This is
Yeah.
like a commercial plug also. I didn't realize when I was writing it, but yeah. Do you have a favorite childhood book or favorite childhood books?
Oh man, I have so many. The first kind of memorable one was this book called The Rainbow Fish, which many of you might have read. My dad actually made me write a book report on it when I was 5.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote something like, if you want to know more about this book, read it yourself.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was the end of my family book report writing career.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Ghanaians have a reputation for being very kind,
Yeah.
welcoming people, but are they also just really intense?
I don't think we're intense, no.
Just maybe just your dad? I feel like that's a lot.
That is a very intense thing to make your
Yeah.
child do, but
Or maybe I'm not doing enough. Okay, favorite Ghanaian food?
oh, I love fried plantains. That's not specific to Ghana, but
Fortunately.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is fufu?
Fufu is like pounded yams and cassava that is like then turned into a round ball and you eat it with soup.
Okay, all right. I have to ask you this question, is a lot of folks, I guess when they were sort of sourcing questions, they wanted to know, just to start here for a second, do you have a writing process? What's your writing process?
I'm the worst writer to ask this question of because I don't really have a good process. When I was writing Homegoing, I think the only kind of limitation I gave myself was to try to write 400 words every time I wrote. So I didn't write every day, but if I sat down to write, I tried to get to 400 words.
Oh, wow.
And that was a good goal for me because I usually didn't hit it.
Yeah.
But if I did 200, I wouldn't feel so bad. And if I did like 1,000, I would feel incrul.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's like those Pinterest like 30-day challenges.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly.
like that. Okay, it's exactly like that. It's nothing like that. Can you even absorb not only what your life is right now, but are you able to absorb the impact that you're having on all of us through this book yet? Has that sunk in yet? Are you going to need to be 50 before that sinks in? How old are you right now?
I'm 27.
What? Some of you, like, you don't like the fact that you resent her a little bit. You're like, yeah. Okay. So can you absorb this?
I don't know. I mean, it's been so crazy. I don't think I've really have had the time to sit down and think through those kinds of things. I'm on my paperback tour now, and so I've just kind of been in a different city every day, and that kind of rapid fire traveling is new to me, and I think it's gonna take a while, I guess, for me to let everything sink in.
Yeah. Well, and pardon me for repeating this, which I may. This book also takes more than one pass. So I've read it twice now, but it's more than one pass. This pass that we have. Technically, are we okay on sound? Is that okay? Okay, great. Thank you, sound man. So this is not something I think that this novel is something that I don't know if you can absorb it the first time through any more than you can absorb how timely it is. I saw you on Tavis Smiley's show, right? And he was saying that this was also coming out at the same time that Roots, the new Roots was coming out.
Yeah.
Have you noticed this kind of synchronicity with this book? And was it your intent to write something that was so on the pulse, or were you trying to answer these questions more for yourself? Or
More the latter. I think
Yeah.
I was really fascinated in this subject matter, and I was kind of, attempting to write the kind of book that I would have wanted to read, which
Yeah.
I think is the only thing you can hope to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to know what the country is going to be concerned with, what the times are going to look like when you start writing a book. And it took me 7 years to write this book. So in 2009, things were much different than they are today. And you can't predict that kind of thing. So I think all you can hope to do is to write what you care about, write something that interests you.
Yeah, gosh. I learned what a mojito was when I was in my 20s. That's like it. So you traveled around a lot when you were younger. I'd like to use the word peripatetic right now.
Okay.
So you had a peripatetic childhood, so you traveled around a lot. What is it like growing up feeling split or divided, or like you're from two places or no place, or what is this like?
The first word that comes to mind, I guess, is lonely.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really kind of isolating way to grow up, and I'm sure there are people in this audience who've moved around a lot too. I think for me, it just made me more inward and more shy.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure every person who has that kind of a childhood reacts differently.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that I would have become as much of a reader as I ended up becoming if I hadn't felt, kind of as though it were difficult to make friends.
Mm-hmm.
Libraries are good places for shy, lonely children, I think.
Plug.
And for everyone, not just shy, lonely children. But really, that was part of the reason I became so obsessed with books. I think was because I got to learn about people in a way that I felt like I couldn't learn about people in my real life.
Perhaps.
I would say Marjorie and Marcus, I guess, are the closest to me. Obviously, they're the closest to our time
Most
period.
current,
So they're probably the closest to all of us.
Okay.
But Marjorie, in particular, I think shares a lot of my kind of biographical information. She's born in Ghana, raised in Alabama, that kind of thing.
Well, and I don't know if this fits exactly, but there's this line that gets repeated, you're nothing from nowhere, that gets kind of repeated over, which I feel like speaks to that a little bit as well, but then everything comes from some of these people that are nothing and nowhere.
Right.
And you have this space, this absence, and that's exactly where things seem to grow from.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the character who starts that, Baba, in the beginning, she says, "You are nothing from nowhere. What can grow from nothing?" And this entire book grows from that nothing. And so in a way, that's an opportunity to talk about how it doesn't matter, I guess, in some ways. If you're ripped apart, you can still kind of create these moments that leave a lasting impact.
Yeah, well, that's interesting too. There's some characters who start out here, and there's some characters that start out here, and they deliberately are trying to switch their positions, actually, in terms of like if this was to represent class, maybe, they're deliberately shifting their positions. Could you say that this is one big love story made up of little love stories?
Sure. I mean, when I
Thought it was a good question.
It is a good question. I mean, when I started, it wasn't until after I finished a first draft of the book and I showed it to my thesis advisor in my master's program, Sam Chang. And she read it and she said, these are all love stories. And I hadn't actually thought of it in that way. But I really like that reading of it. And I like.
Because we don't. When it comes to these like slavery, we don't think of that as a love story.
No, certainly not.
No.
But I mean, on a practical level, for a multi-generational novel, people have to have babies. And so, that's part of why love kind of features in so many of these stories. But it's not just romantic love. There's familial love, which I think is the kind of strongest tie that any of these characters have. The idea that, if things aren't going to be good for them, they can at least make it better for their children.
Yes.
I think that's kind of the force of kind of struggle that occurs throughout this novel.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that particular type of love up because it starts with a mother. Yeah, absolutely. And those, I was gonna say, you nailed it. Like, Correct. Oh man, I just keep coming back. Okay, I was wondering if you could talk about this. I don't know if you can talk about this. I think we have, at least in our own way, in a sweeping way, an idea of the ripple effects of slavery in these here United States. How has it affected Ghana in modern times? What is it like there?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, from when I finished writing the novel, I gave my father just the chapters that took place in Ghana, just kind of to get some feedback on whether or not I had gotten things right or not. But I also started to talk to my parents about how much of this kind of thing they had learned in school, for example. And both of them said not very much.
Yeah.
And you know, my mother grew up only about 50 miles from the Cape Coast Castle, and yet had never been there. Nobody in her family had been there. There isn't the same kind of relationship, I guess, to the history of slavery that there is here, where at least we do get, you know, a history course on it.
Sure.
As we're growing up. I don't
Sure.
think that maybe things have changed now. I didn't grow up there, so I can't speak to
Yeah.
what it's like in schools today.
Yeah.
But at least from my parents' perspective, a lot of this was kind of new to them.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I was so fantastic about this book, is it's expanding that narrative that we are talking about and teaching ourselves here. And actually, to speak to that also, there's a scene when they are at the castle, and it was bizarre to me that it wasn't like just encapsulated in time, that there's like people still like fishing and then these women by the trees just hanging out. Like it isn't just preserved as a museum, it's still like this living, breathing thing, even though it's not it's not functioning in the same capacity, obviously, but it's alive.
Yeah, it's alive. It's there. It's a beautiful building to look at, and on one of the most beautiful beaches.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, this horrible thing was occurring inside of it.
Well, I hope I don't forget, I do want to talk about beauty in this story as a person, as a theme. But before we do that, and hopefully we can come back to that, could you just sort of maybe talk about the genesis of to Ghana, or from Ghana and then back to Ghana, and a bit of the process of how you came to come to the castle and all of it, yeah.
Sure. So in 2009, my sophomore year at Stanford, I received a fellowship called the Chapelugee Fellowship, and it's one that they give to sophomore students to complete a research or creative arts project the summer between sophomore and junior years. And I knew that I wanted to use mine to research a novel. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to write about, but I thought that I wanted to write a novel about a mother and her daughter. And so I thought it would be nice to go to Abakrumpa, which is my mother's hometown, and just see if anything kind of came up for me artistically. And sadly, nothing was. And so I was kind of, you know, walking around Ghana feeling like I had wasted everybody's time and money and confidence. And then a friend came to visit. And so just kind of in thinking of things to do to occupy our time while he was visiting Ghana for the first time, we decided to go see the Cape Coast Castle. And I'd never been before, and it was while there that I took the tour that they give to any tourist who goes. And the tour guide started taking us through the upper levels, and he was talking to us about how the British soldiers who used to live and work in the castle would sometimes marry the local Ghanaian women, which was something I had never heard before, and really fascinated me. And then from there, he took us down to see the dungeons where they kept the slaves. And that still, I think to this day, is one of the most harrowing experiences I've ever had. They close the door so that you can get a sense of how dark it would be, and there's just this little tiny sliver of light. And I mean, I was only in there for 5 minutes, but trying to imagine, I guess, what it would be like to be in a room like that for, you know, months at a time. I was so struck by that. And not just that, but further imagining the fact that there were free Ghanaian people walking up above, and I thought, how strange, you know, how strange to kind of be walking over these people.
Yeah.
And so I immediately knew that I wanted to write something that could juxtapose those two experiences, that of a woman who would be living up above, free, and that of a woman who would be kept in the dungeons as a slave. But I didn't know anything beyond that. You know, I didn't know how long it would take or what it would look like. I just knew that I was interested in that idea.
I didn't think to put this down. Where did the stone come from, this concept of the stone?
The stone came very late in the process, actually. I finished an entire draft of the novel, and then that teacher I had that I told you about, Sam Chang, she, after reading it, she said, well, you know, it would be nice to have this kind of physical representation of family that we could follow through the lineage.
Okay.
And so upon writing the second draft, I included the stone.
Could you explain that, I guess, for folks who haven't read it?
Yeah, so there's a black stone necklace that, well, it's just a black stone. One of the sisters turns it into a necklace that is given to both sisters. And it follows down the line on the Ghanaian side, so the descendants are able to keep their stone. And on the American side, the stone gets lost. And so that was just a way of kind of allowing the novel to cohere, I guess, in a way that allows the reader to kind of think about this physical object.
Yeah, gosh, that's genius. I'm gonna say genius and beautiful too much. I think I already said, I don't know. The little things in the story, there were moments where I had to just stop and absorb what was being said, not because something grand had happened, but quite the opposite was true. Significance of something as powerful, as meaningful as this small stone, for example, but bugs. You talk a lot about these little insects in the book. There's a moment where somebody trips and they wonder if it hadn't been an ant that had tripped them. And I thought back to every single time that I've like tripped and stuff, I told that there was an ant being like, that's for Rebecca, you know, or whatever. There's the butterflies, there's snails, there's the spilling with the bucket, and maybe an insect wanted a bath. And so could you talk a little bit about these, because it's only, and one reason why it kind of hit me again in the second time reading it was that, I was going to say second time reading it, first I read it as a hardcover, and then I bought the soft cover, and it was different the second time. Anyway, but I was just wondering if you could speak to that, because it's only 300 pages was the point I was trying to make, so there's not a lot of space. And so why did you add these little things in?
Yeah, nobody's ever asked me that before. I think...
I will. Tell our creator. I'm up two.
For the earlier chapters in the novel, I was using a really great book for research purposes. It's called The Door of No Return by William St. Clair. And it kind of takes you through the castle and talks about the women who live there, the children, the soldiers, the layout. And it also had a really interesting section on the kind of wildlife. And I think this was because, you know, the British are coming to a new environment and they're very interested in, you know, the new things that they're seeing. And so I just noticed throughout that book there was mention of just the different kinds of insects and animals that people were encountering for the first time in many cases. So maybe that got in my head in some way and made me want to write about insects on my own.
It was lovely. It's interesting. I was just thinking, because there's that when she comes back from the castle and all the colors have dulled, how like the world has actually gone the opposite direction, lost a lot of that. Okay, well, one more thing that I would like to talk about, and then I'd like to move into some reading, because there's never enough time. But this graceful, and I heard you use the word toggle, but this graceful toggle and torque and jumping back and forth, the freedom and the confidence that you had to just bounce along this timeline. How did you decide to do that? And how did you come about that way you did it?
That was probably the hardest thing about writing this book, and the thing that took me the longest to figure out. So when I started it in 2009, I'd had a much more traditional structure in mind. I thought that I wanted to have a novel that would take place in the present, So if you read it kind of with the last two characters, though they weren't really, and then just flash back to 18th century Ghana. But the longer I worked on it, the more I realized that it was much more interesting for me to kind of be able to think through the passage of time, I guess, for a lack of better way of putting it. I just wanted to kind of be able to watch things like slavery and colonialism shift really gradually over this great big period of time.
Yeah.
And I felt like if I did it the way that I had intended to do it initially, you would lose that through line, so it would be less clear which things came from what things,
Yeah.
And so after about 3 years and 100 pages, I threw out everything that I had been working on and started over again with the idea of being able to stop in as many generations as possible.
How did you suffer that? Did that feel like a defeat? How did that feel to be like, just chuck it?
It didn't feel like a defeat.
Yeah.
I mean, I had been writing I'd been writing lots of things for many years, and most of them never saw the light of day in any way. And so for me, it didn't feel. It just felt like I was losing something that I knew wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And so it didn't hurt in that way.
Yeah. There's a passage with Marcus where he's talking about his experience. He's talking about his experience in researching, and I was wondering maybe if that again was a bit autobiographical and just this delving into this particular story seems to be so interconnected with so many other things. It's hard to just talk about one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have that marked out?
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, great. Oh, also wait, how much time does this cover?
The novel covers roughly 250 years.
And the book's 300 pages?
Yes.
So like each page is about, okay, all right, okay. So to set this up, there's this character Marcus, and he's doing his research for, what is he researching?
He's researching for a PhD in sociology.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So he says, originally, he'd wanted to focus his work on the convict leasing system that had stolen years off of his great-grandpa H's life. But the deeper into the research he got, the bigger the project got. How could he talk about great-grandpa H's story without also talking about his grandma Willie and the millions of other black people who had migrated north, fleeing Jim Crow? And if he mentioned the Great Migration, he'd have to talk about the cities that took that flock in. He'd have to talk about Harlem. And how could he talk about Harlem without mentioning his father's heroin addiction, the stints in prison, the criminal record? And if he was going to talk about heroin and Harlem in the 60s, wouldn't he also have to talk about crack everywhere in the 80s? And if he wrote about crack, he'd inevitably be writing too about the war on drugs. And if he started talking about the war on drugs, he'd be talking about how nearly half of the black men he grew up with were on their way either into or out of what had become the harshest prison system in the world. And if he talked about why friends from his neighborhood were doing 5-year bids for possession of marijuana when nearly all of the white people he'd gone to college with smoked it openly every day, he'd get so angry that he'd slam the research book on the table of the beautiful but deadly silent Lane Reading Room of Green Library of Stanford University. And if he slammed the book down, then everyone in the room would stare, and all they would see would be his skin and his anger, and they'd think they knew something about him. And it would be the same something that had justified putting his great-grandpa H in prison, only it would be different too, less obvious than it once was. When Marcus started to think this way, he couldn't get himself to open even one book.
I feel like you are helping not only, so-called white America, but also so-called black America better understand why we are where we are this way. Leading it all up and then taking all those steps and then deciding not even to approach it, that it's a little bit too much, but inevitably it comes back anyhow. It is still inescapable for this character, for all of us. It is still inescapable. I love that you are not excusing sort of the weight of the guilt, but you're sort of redistributing, it feels like, a bit of, by bringing in some reality, which is interesting. Like I'm reading this novel and it never once felt like fiction, you know? It just really, but I was wondering if you could talk about perspective. And so it's on page 226. So there's a history teacher in this, whose name is?
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, just talking about the idea of perspective in history. Starting with whose story is correct.
Whose story is correct? Yao asked them. They looked around at the boys who had spoken, as though trying to establish their allegiance by holding a gaze, casting a vote by sending a glance. Finally, once the murmuring subsided, Peter raised his hand. Mr. Ejekum, we cannot know which story is correct. He looked at the rest of the class, slowly understanding. We cannot know which story is correct because we were not there. Yao nodded. He sat in his chair at the front of the room and looked at all the young men. This is the problem of history. We cannot know that which we were not there to see and hear and experience for ourselves. We must rely upon the words of others. Those who were there in the olden days, they told stories to their children so that their children would know, so that the children could tell stories to their children, and so on and so on. But now we come upon the problem of conflicting stories. Kojo Nyako says that when the soldiers came to his village, their coats were red, but Kwame Edu says that they were blue. Whose story do we believe then? The boys were silent. They stared at him, waiting. We believe the one who has the power. He is the one who gets to write the story. So when you study history, you must always ask yourself, whose story am I missing? Whose voice was suppressed so that this voice could come forth? Once you have figured that out, you must find that story too. From there, you begin to get a clearer, yet still imperfect picture.
Is it fair to say this is a woman's story? Is it even necessary to look at it like that? The reason I ask is all my quotes almost are from dudes in the book. It's almost all guys that I've picked out. But when we were talking about this before you are here today, we were discussing just that so often there are these big men and a big man in the story, but it is really the women's beauty and power and strength that carries through. Is it fair to say that we feel a woman's voice the entire time, even when men are speaking in this book?
Sure, I think that's fair. I heard this quote that when somebody asked Isabel Allende why she wrote such strong women characters, and she said, well, I don't know any weak women.
Yeah.
For my part, I think I knew that this novel was going to be a multi-generational novel, and my people, the Akan people of Ghana, are matrilineal, and so I felt like if I was going to write a book that kind of follows the family lineage, talking about inheritance and the kinds of things that we inherit, it only made sense to start with women, with mothers. And then necessarily those two women that begin the book are the two forces, I think, that continue down the line.
Yeah. And there's never one place singularly where that rests. There are people who do what we would consider to be, when we're in our most grounded, moral ground, whatever, doing wicked things or bad things or whatever, but it never stops there. It always ripples out further. And I was wondering if we could go to page 57 and the introduction of this, really this concept through the name Richard. And talking about, again, this idea, like we have the fetish priest at one point, we have a missionary at one point, we have a woman who is has a snake and a witch and all these things and roots under the bed, and depending on where you stand, these are perfectly normal. They're not even having to be pushed into the extreme of good or evil, they just are. Right. And then there's folks who hold this as like the weight of bad or incorrect or evil or wicked. So, so yeah, like maybe talk about Richard for a second here.
He gave Quay his snail, then marked a line in the dirt at the starting point. The two boys put their snails behind the line, then released them. At first, neither snail moved. Are they stupid? Cujo asked, prodding his snail with his index finger. You're free, stupid snails, go. Maybe they're just shocked, Quay said, and Cujo looked at him like he was the one who was stupid. But then Quay's snail started to move past the line, followed seconds later by Cujo's snail. Quay's snail didn't move like a snail usually did, slowly and deliberately. It was as though he knew he was racing, as though he knew he was free. It didn't take long for the boys to lose sight of him, while Cujo's snail ambled along, even turning in a circle several times. Suddenly, Quay was nervous. Maybe Cujo would be angry at him and tell him to leave the village and never come back. Quay had only just met Cujo, but already he knew that he didn't want to lose him. He did the only thing he could think to do. He stuck out his hand as he'd often seen his father do after business deals, and to his surprise, Cujo took it. The boys shook. My snail was very stupid, but yours did well, Cujo said. Yes, mine did very well, Quay agreed, relieved. We should name them. We'll call mine Richard because it's a British name, and he was bad like the British are bad. Yours can be named Kwame. Quay laughed. Yes, Richard is bad like the British, he said. He forgot in that second that his own father was British. And when he remembered later, he realized that he didn't care. He felt only that he belonged fully and completely.
You do this thing in the book where you don't, I mean, from the colors on the cover to the stones, you will split it in two, but you don't also allow us to really assign this side these things and this side these things. You don't let us sit still. Why didn't you ever let us relax in this way? Can't there just be a bad guy, you know?
No, I mean, it wasn't interesting to me to have a kind of novel where everything was white and black, literally and figuratively. I don't think that's really how it worked. You know, I think that even people who were doing kind of some of the greatest atrocities that we can imagine did not recognize that they were doing evil things, because then why would that persist, you know? I think everybody believes that they're right, that they're doing the best that they can. And that's a harder thing to think through, you know, that's a more painful thing to think through. But a more interesting question, ultimately. So if you have a character like James, for example, who is the British governor of the Cape Coast Castle, he's married to a Ghanaian woman, a Gold Coast woman. He clearly loves her, clearly loves his son, and yet, you know, he sends Essie, Athea's sister, on to be a slave. And how can you kind of do both things at once? How can you justify the good thing, that is that love, and the bad thing? That's a more interesting question.
Doing the best. I'm doing the best I can. Wow. And he even he recognizes, he sees so clearly that is his wife, but how could it be? He sees that and still sends her off really with a smile.
Right, well, he's able to compartmentalize in the ways that I think all of us do in our day-to-day lives, where this is my work, and, you know, it was a job. Slavery was a huge economic, you know, system, and so this is my work and this is my life, without kind of thinking about the further implications.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Corporations are people.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, on that one, I don't know why you're laughing on that one. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this was one thing here. How are we doing on time? Okay. This is one thing. I have been raised with a story or a narrative of if you're black, then you are, if you're black in America in any way, shape, or form, you are a descendant of slaves, which isn't necessarily the case all the time. And if you are a descendant of slaves, then you were a king, a queen, a prince, or princess, right? And I was explaining to you backstage, but I heard it put in terms, I saw a performer and he was saying, this is the overcompensation. So if, you know, after feeling the impact of slavery, you kick it all the way back this way to balance it out. But I was wondering if we could sort of move beyond that and sort of acknowledge something deeper when it comes to this idea of royalty. On page 250, there is, and from this I want to talk a little bit about the intangible things that are in this story. But on page 250, the band that had been playing.
The band that had been playing seemed to bow before her. Without Amani needing to say anything at all, the pianist stood up to give her the stool, and the others cleared the stage. She set her drink on top of the piano and started running her hands along the keys. Here, on the piano, was the same lack of urgency that Sunny had noticed before, just fingers lazily ambling along. It was when she started singing that the room grew really quiet. She was a small woman, but her voice was so deep it made her look much larger. There was a gravelly quality to the sound, too, like she had been gargling with pebbles to prepare herself. She swayed while she sang, first one way, then a cock of the head before moving the other way. When she started to scat, the small crowd grunted and moaned and even shouted amen once or twice. A few people came in off the street and stood in the doorway, just trying to catch a glimpse of her. She ended in a hum, a sound that seemed to come from the fullest part of her gut, where some said the soul lived. It reminded Sunny of his childhood, of the first day his mother sang out in church. He was young, and Josephine, his sister, was just a baby, bopping on Eli's knee. His mother had dropped her songbook on the ground, and the whole congregation had been startled by the noise, looking up at her. Sunny felt his heart catch in his throat. He remembered that he had been embarrassed for her. Back then, he was always angry at or embarrassed by her. But then she had started to sing. "I shall wear a crown," she sang. "I shall wear a crown." It was the most beautiful thing Sunny had ever heard, and he loved his mother then, like he had never loved her before. The congregation said, "Sing, Willie," and amen, and bless God, and it seemed to Sunny that his mother didn't have to wait for heaven for her reward. He could see it. She was already wearing her crown.
We can go back into the book if you like, but there is this prevailing spirit and spirits that come through in the book. And I was wondering if you could talk about that in terms of the book, and I was wondering about your personal connection to things that are hard to put your finger on or talk about, the realm of dream and the realm of spirit, and how much those things impact us, certainly as artists and in the story and all of those kind of things. Can you, and there's this fantastically vibrant character, the firewoman, who is in this story, in this book, who isn't, again, allowed to be just good or bad, just one thing or the other. Could you speak a little bit to that, to the things that live beyond the five senses in terms of this book and your personal experience writing it?
Sure. I mean, people sometimes talk about magical realism as a genre of fiction, right? But that begs the question, magical to whom? You know, to somebody who experiences those things as reality, it's just realism. And so playing with this idea, I think for me, I wanted to kind of, I guess, privilege all forms of belief, all forms of thinking and seeing, whether or not it's the kind of things that we necessarily in the West accept as true or real. There's a moment towards the end of the novel in Marjorie's chapter where her grandmother puts her umbilical cord into the water as a reminder so that when Marjorie dies, her spirit will return home. And that's something my own grandmother did for me and my brothers. And so that idea that there is a spirit, right, that the spirit can go different places, was not something that felt unusual or magical to me. But I think that's because of where I grew up or the people that I grew up around. Whereas, you know, for other people that seems like something out of the ordinary. And so I didn't want to make one thing right or one thing wrong. You know, if that's how you experience the world, a world that allows for visitations by people like the fire woman, for example, or a world that believes that if you put a root under somebody's bed, maybe they'll have a chance of having a child. That's just as valid in this book as a character who goes to church, such as Willie. And so I think for me it was just an attempt to kind of show the roundness of belief. And the kind of different possibilities, and also I guess the comfort that comes with those kinds of beliefs. For Willie, the character who has lost so much, and then finds herself in that moment that Sunny is describing in the church singing this song, and it's kind of her first time feeling any sort of comfort. And that to me is just as beautiful and just as true as a character like Akuya, who's having these truly awful visitations from the fire woman, this spirit.
Well, somebody might categorize as being schizophrenic, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Like
I think she would be ascribed all kinds of mental illness here. But you know, for her and for that time, I think, you know, it wasn't something to be afraid of. It was kind of something to embrace and to learn from.
Can we go to that part 276 where Marjorie is talking to her grandmother about leaving?
On her poem, For the Waters We Wade In, when her father got a call from Ghana, Old Lady was frail. Her caretaker couldn't tell if the dreams were the same or different. Old Lady didn't leave the bed as often as she used to. She, the woman who had once been afraid of sleep. Marjorie wanted her family to go to Ghana immediately. She stopped writing the poem, snatched the phone away from her confused father, an act that on any other day would have earned her a knock on the head, and demanded that the caretaker put Old Lady on the phone, even if it meant waking her. "Are you sick?" she asked her grandmother. "Sick? I will soon be dancing with you by the water this summer. How can I be sick?" "You won't die?" "What have I told you about death?" Old Lady said sharply into the phone, her voice sounding stronger than it had at the beginning of their conversation. Marjorie tugged at the cord. Old Lady said that only bodies died. Spirits wandered. They found Asamundo or they didn't. They stayed with their descendants to guide them through life, to comfort them, sometimes to scare them into waking from their fog of unliving. Marjorie reached for the stone at her neck, her ancestor's gift. "Promise me you won't leave until I can see you again," Marjorie said. Behind her, Yao placed a hand on her shoulder. "I promise I will never leave you," Old Lady said.
Yaa Gyasi, thank you so much for sharing this time with us.